Hi, I'm Garrett Elliott. This is the 1000 Album Podcast, and I think you should hear High and Dry by Radiohead.
Hi, I'm Jeff Stephen, and you're listening to the 1000 Album Podcast. This season, we'll be talking about must-hear songs as I continue to ask people that are important to me all about the music that's important to them. Enjoy! Please welcome Garrett Elliott.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
And the song of choice today is Radiohead's High and Dry. So my first question would be, where is the Radiohead and Garrett Elliott introduction?
I was a teenager in the 90s, and High and Dry was the first Radiohead song that I ever heard. Before Creep, actually, and Creep was their big hit. High and Dry was the first song I heard on the radio. I recorded it onto a cassette tape at the time because I didn't know what it was, but it just resonated with me. I just really enjoyed the sound. I enjoyed just the vibe of the song. Didn't know who it was, but wanted to track them down. Eventually found out that it was Radiohead. It was from an album called The Bends. Bought the album, and I think, like a lot of teenagers, it was kind of the first music that I identified as my own. It wasn't my parents' music. It wasn't something from a brother or a friend. It was something that I heard and that I identified as my own thing and kind of adopted it as my band. So that was kind of my story with Radiohead, I guess.
And that's a very good band to have as your first band.
Exactly. I know. That's a great introduction to good music.
Love it. And it's funny, those cassette recordings I find so impactful. I still have a vivid memory of one where I recorded Space Hogs in the meantime, and it flowed right into the Smashing Pumpkins Zero, and it's just this flawless transition that it could only have been captured on a cassette in the 90s.
And sometimes you get that DJ intro or that DJ outro that gets embedded in your brain kind of as part of the song as well.
Absolutely. Nice. And I'm impressed you heard that before Creep too, because there was for many, and myself included, Creep was the intro with the obligatory clean verses, hugely distorted chorus. But High and Dry was definitely a different direction for them too, where it wasn't just that same sort of 90s sound maybe most artists were going for.
Yeah, it was quiet, loud. It was more like mellow, slightly less mellow, more mellow again.
And it was something that not only was it a band it was your band, but it was also like they were very much their own band, and nobody was quite like them for sure. And with the song itself, High and Dry, are there certain things that in particular appeal to you about the song?
I think at the time, as a teenager, I was playing drums. I was kind of an aspiring drummer. I was playing in different bands, and that song in particular jumps out as a song that you can get together with your friends and you can actually play. You can get in your basement, you can get in the garage with somebody that dabbles on a guitar and a bass and some drums, and you can play that song, which is a pretty cool experience, I think, for teenagers to be creative and to have that outlet, and again, to have something that's yours that you can experiment with. So that was a big thing for me when I first heard the song, is that, okay, I can play this with my friends and we can be creative, or we can have fun and we can explore this music.
And as the drummer too, that drum intro is so fantastic too.
It is. And not only the intro, but there's a part during the guitar solo towards the end where the drummer, Phil Selway, plays on the ride cymbal, and it's just such a pure, clean ride cymbal sound. It's so good. The whole vibe of the song is great.
Oh, 100%. And you're totally right that it's doable, because I think that the bulk of the song for the aspiring guitarist like myself, it was mostly 3 chords.
Yep.
And it was those great ringing open chords too, where you didn't have to play anything on the top 2 strings, just let them ring, which is amazing. And it was a great I remember one of the first tricks a lot of us learned on the guitar was the harmonics. And so there's that great one where the lyric towards the end where it's like, it's the best thing that you ever had, and the do. It was just a fun little showpiece.
It's just there. Yeah, you got to show it off if you can play it. Yeah.
Nice. And it's definitely, compared to some of their later sounds, this one was definitely easier to replicate in the garage with friends.
Definitely. Definitely.
Nice. And it's fun too, because like you said, it was ones that you guys could play. And the guitarist, Johnny Greenwood, is just beyond brilliant. But in this case, it's probably one of his more basic parts, but it's also at the same time one of his more beautiful ones, where I was mentioning earlier the show The Good Place, where Eleanor had the devastating insult of "ya basic." But in this case here, the part is so simple yet so gorgeous, and so I think there was something really there.
Yeah, there's some restraint, I think, for a band that's so, and they evolved, and everybody knows kind of the story of Radiohead, I hope. But, for a band that's so talented and could be so explosive and so full on a lot of their songs, there was so much restraint in High and Dry. And Fake Plastic Trees as well, so much restraint in that song that, the whole album kind of flows through different, I guess, experiences through the talent of the band.
Yes, and that's when you mentioned Fake Plastic Trees too, because the one disagreement I have with you about choosing this as the must-hear song is I find High and Dry near impossible to listen to without going directly into Fake Plastic Trees.
It's true, and actually, I went back and forth on which song. I think Fake Plastic Trees is the better song, probably, but I was trying to think of which angle to come at for this podcast, and I think for me, High and Dry, like I said, that was the entry point into Radiohead for me, so personally, that song resonated with me a little bit more.
Nice. So that would be part of the answer to this question. But sort of, if I could ask you to summarize, like, yes, Radiohead, undeniably great band, High and Dry, undeniably great song. But what would you say is the sort of, if people were going to listen to one Radiohead song today, why would it be High and Dry?
Ooh, that's a great question. Again, I think it's really accessible, and for a band that has evolved so much over the years, it's a great way to see where they started and where they influenced a lot of bands, like whether it's Travis or Coldplay. That sound from High and Dry just continues on in music today, in pop music. So I think it's a great starting point where you can hear this is a band that maybe they didn't originate that sound, but they were one of the biggest bands of the time in the 90s, and they certainly popularized that sound. They evolved further, and you can go down that rabbit hole. You can listen to their more electronic stuff, and maybe that appeals to you, maybe it doesn't. But I think it's a great starting point.
Yeah, and it worked out well for you for sure.
Yeah,
as your starting point. That's good. And yes, I concur that they were definitely one of the most influential, most important. And there's a clip I like to show in my business classes at school where we'll be talking about improving productivity, and I'll play one of the considerably less Radiohead accessible songs, Fitter, Happier, and More Productive. But it also links into one that they probably resonate with more, where there was a clip on The Big Bang Theory, the TV show, where the character Sheldon said, I have an understanding of all of the things in the universe. And one of the other characters, Penny, replied, what's Radiohead? And he stood there in sort of stunned silence for 10 or 15 seconds for comedic effect, and eventually said, I have an understanding of the important things in the universe, which was a bit interesting, but I disagree because I think they are beyond important in terms of if you want to see where music went from 1993 onwards, they'd be definitely a place to look.
And I think when you find those bands as a teenager, that music sticks with you as you grow up and as you're an adult, and you come back to it. And I think for Radiohead as well, like, what is Radiohead? They're musicians, they're a band, but I mean, they're also artists. Like, they've got a really interesting documentary called Meeting People is Easy. And that, when I saw that documentary as a teenager, it kind of scrambled my brain a little bit because I was really into that aesthetic for a really long time. And it's kind of this sterile, cold, lonely aesthetic. Like, there's a lot of footage of like empty airports and empty terminals and empty highways and roads and cars at night and that kind of thing. But that was part of their voice and part of their creativity at the time. So they've gone on, they've evolved, and they've done all these different things. But I think they're probably a little bit more than musicians just because of how much impact they've had on the industry. And you mentioned Johnny Greenwood earlier. He scores movies now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when they had to do the visual component in there as part of the, I guess, promotional strategies, I remember I had a DVD of theirs. It was called 7 television commercials.
Yep.
Where they referred to their music videos as television commercials. Yep. And even still, they're like, the videos they did produce were beyond memorable as well.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the first videos I saw was Just, where, the band is playing a song in an apartment somewhere, and meanwhile there's a scene happening on the street where there's a guy laying on the sidewalk and nobody knows why, and they're trying to figure out why he's laying there, and he won't tell anybody, and it's a whole kind of mini story in this music video. And as well too, I mean, we're sitting in front of the albums. The album art had a big part in Radiohead's creativity as well. So yeah, lots to talk about as far as their aesthetic, and not only musically but visually as well.
For sure. And I was delighted that Holly at the age of 13 considers Just one of her favorite 5 videos of all time.
Nice.
And I had a wonderful parenting moment the other day where I walked by her room and she was strumming the guitar chords to that, so I sort of dusted off my hands and said, my work here is done.
That's awesome. Yeah, my teenage daughter was listening to No Surprises of her own volition the other day, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Amazing. And the 2 albums from whence those came, so No Surprises from OK Computer, High and Dry from the Bends. When I put together a list of I think it was the top 15 albums a few years ago, these were, I think, number 3 and 5. And so if one band is capable of producing 2, what's the Mary Poppins lines, practically perfect in every way, right. albums, that is something to be said for sure.
And I think, being a teenager in the 90s, OK Computer and the Bends are my albums, but I think, there's been a resurgence in Rainbows. It's a pretty popular album amongst a certain generation, younger than me, but that album is pretty popular, and I'm a fan of that album, but it doesn't resonate the same way as the earlier ones that I heard when I was a teenager.
Oh, for sure. And I find I'm completely unreasonable about if it came out between 1992 and 1997. I will always have that lens of when I first heard it.
Exactly.
So it's difficult to compare with that, for sure. Well, a huge thank you for coming today, Garrett, and until the next time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
This has been the 1000-Second Album Podcast. Thanks for sharing some of your time, energy, and attention with us today. Take care.